This phone call between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin to broker a ceasefire deal in the Ukraine-Russia war seems like it was a bit of a fizzer. We're told the conversation between the two leaders lasted over 2 hours, though there's not a great deal to show for it. There was a little bit of progress in that Russia agreed to halt airstrikes on energy infrastructure.
You have a lot of guns pointing at each other, and a ceasefire without going a little bit further would have been tough. Russia has the advantage, as you know. They have encircled about 2,500 soldiers. They're nicely encircled, and that's not good. And we want to get it over with. Look, we're doing this. There are no Americans involved. There could be if you end up in World War III over this.
Joining me now to discuss this and more, senior analyst at the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, Malcolm Davis. Malcolm, welcome. It obviously falls well short of the month-long ceasefire that Ukraine and the US agreed to just a week ago. It doesn't seem like we're going to reach such an agreement with Putin. Certainly not on any terms that would be advantageous to the United States or Ukraine.
Absolutely, and I was interesting to hear Trump repeating Russian propaganda there, stating that Ukrainian forces in Kursk are encircled. That's actually not true. The Russians are claiming that, but it's factually incorrect. The other aspect about the phone call was that supposedly Putin and Trump agreed to a ceasefire on energy infrastructure. Well, within an hour of that phone call ending, the Russians launched attacks on Ukrainian energy infrastructure. So the Russians violated the agreement from the get-go. And I think that that is indicative of where this effort is going on the part of the Trump administration. Putin treats Trump with contempt, and he exploits him. He plays him like a violin. And essentially, he knows that Trump is prepared to give Putin, to give him everything that Putin wants. And so I think what you are seeing here is something akin to Munich 1938, peace in our time, where some sort of agreement would be signed that would be advantageous for the Russians, give them time to rearm and regroup. But as the Russians are trying to claim, deny Ukraine the ability to strengthen its own defences at the same time.
Is there anything that can be offered to Putin without giving him everything that he wants to achieve either a ceasefire or an end to this war? I mean, I suppose if you want to achieve an end to the war, everyone's got to give up something somewhere along the way. Is there a middle ground, or is it not going to happen unless Putin gets everything he asks for?
Well, the wrong approach is to give Putin anything, okay? Putin, Russia, is the aggressor here. They are the ones that launched the invasion of Ukraine, and to give Putin something in return for peace is appeasement. And all it does is embolden Putin to take more. So certainly Putin would sign a ceasefire agreement and maybe stick with it for a few months. But in those few months, Russia would regroup and rearm so that they're better positioned to be able to launch the war again a year down the track. So I'm sorry, but I am not convinced that peace with Putin is possible. I think that Putin is determined to impose his will on not just Ukraine, but the rest of Eastern and Central Europe. His territorial ambitions go way beyond the borders of Ukraine. He made that very clear prior to the invasion of Ukraine, where he sent a list of demands to the West, basically stating that he wants NATO to withdraw to 1997 borders, which would essentially see the Baltic states, Poland, Romania, and others all under Russian control. So I do not see this as anything other than history rhyming, and this is a modern day version of Munich and the Sudetenland.
A couple of other things to get through quickly. The news broke in The Australian during this show last night that Richard Marles was considering scaling back life-extending upgrades of the Collin-class submarines. That was confirming a report that had previously been in The Australian. How damaging is this for our already gaping capacity gap and, of course, the precarious nature of AUKUS at the moment?
Hugely damaging. If they go down this path of what's known now as LOTE light, where essentially they don't really upgrade much of anything in the submarines, then those submarines are going to be obsolete and basically incapable of operating by the time we get to the end of this decade. And so what we end up with is a capability gap where we don't have a credible submarine capability, particularly in the face of rapid modernization of China's submarine forces. And then if the Virginia-class SSNs are delayed for any reason, that capability gap becomes a yawning chasm. And so going down the path of this light, as the Defence Minister and Deputy Prime Minister has suggested, is a huge mistake.
Just before you go quickly, the ceasefire looks well and truly over between Israel and Hamas. Israel has obviously now resumed bombings in Gaza. What's your read on this? Could we see the war basically start up proper again?
Like, I wasn't surprised that the ceasefire collapsed because Hamas was refusing to honour the terms of the ceasefire. And I think Israel recognised that. They were very patient, but in the end, they had to act. So, yes, I do think we are going to see the resumption of the war. Whether we get back to some form of ceasefire and some sort of hostage exchange, I don't know. But I certainly think for the time being, it's going to be back to war.
Malcolm Davis, thank you for your time.